Welcome to the show. Today I've got something a little bit different for you. Over the last 12 months, I have racked up a few particularly hot LinkedIn hot takes, and I wanted to combine them all into this one podcast episode. Once you go through this one episode, you'll never need to listen to another podcast again. But even if that's not true, what I can promise you is that if you stick around for the next few minutes, I'm going to be wearing a far less ugly sweater, and that I can guarantee. So let's get into it. So the first one, this is from a couple weeks ago. It's that agency owners, below are a few truths we've learned from helping agencies take the biz dev process from reactive to proactive. Number one, building a lead gen system that moves the needle is solving a hard entrepreneurial problem. Be skeptical of any system or methodology that doesn't require direct involvement from owners. Number two, lead gen is important. By hook or by crook, it's someone's full-time job. Number three, hiring a salesperson before you have a system that's producing results can be disastrous. I've made this mistake many times, sort of like if you hired a driver to engineer you a Formula One race car. Number three, ultimately, your agency will be better at getting leads than any outside party will because you care more and your finger is very much on the pulse, or at least it ought to be. Number four, more than just winning new clients, going from reactive to proactive means developing new skills, just like anything worthwhile, and learning new skills and being somewhat of a beginner again is kind of like jumping into cold water. Number five, you will see your full sales cycle for the first time instead of just the tail end of it that you might be experiencing right now if you are used to referrals and RFPs and that kind of thing. So this is both a good and a bad thing. It can be a challenge because you're going to get people at an earlier stage that might have more questions, more skepticism, more chaos, more confusion, but you are also going to be fine-tuning your offer, getting stronger, talking to way more people than you would if you're just waiting on the odd referral to come in. Cool. So that brings us to number six. You will shine a floodlight on the good, bad, and ugly parts of your value proposition, and tied to that is sales process and everything there. What we tend to see is that when the agency is reliant on referrals, organic, and kind of like reactive new business, they have the luxury of getting away with way more chaos and inconsistency in the process. So getting focused on being proactive, and whether that's through outbound or something else, makes you have to tighten up what you're doing, right? Because you're getting people, again, at an earlier stage. Number seven, you will build more clarity about your ideal clients, even if you're already specialized. We've worked with agencies that focus on one thing, like fintech companies between X and Y. But what I found, and I see this with our business serving the agency space, is like specialization's kind of like a fractal. If you don't know fractals, they're like this mathematical phenomenon. They look kind of psychedelic, like you're on acid, and you zoom in on it and it gets more and more complicated and just keeps expanding as you zoom in. So that's not literally true. Like, you can learn a lot. It's not like it's just infinite, but as you focus on a particular vertical or particular area, you sort of find more differences between different pockets of that vertical, different decision makers, different types of businesses that you might focus on. Plus, a lot of the time when agencies start specializing, they are starting way too broad. They're thinking about like healthcare. Well, healthcare is a ginormous umbrella. Or they're thinking B2B, or even us with agencies. Like, we are in the process of honing in on that even more, even though that we're focused on, boutique agencies, approximately 11 to 200 employees. There's still so many different pockets of that and so many different areas to speak to. So that's number seven. To bring us to number eight, which is the final hard truth, your head trash and assumptions are not your prospects' head trash and assumptions. You do not share a hive mind. So we all naturally want to think like, well, I would do it this way, or I wouldn't do it that way, or I would respond to this email outreach, or I wouldn't respond to this other piece of email outreach. We had a longtime member in our group that was like, we were going through copy with them, and they were like, why would anybody respond to this? Or, why would they ever talk to me? And then the fact is, like, that particular agency had more experience in their niche than 99.9% of the people in in their prospects inboxes, right? So a lot of the times it's like taking a little bit of a leap of faith, and unless there's something that really rubs you the wrong way, going out of your comfort zone to basically admit, like, I don't know what I don't know. And that's how you're able to do these experiments and build campaigns that get meetings and keep the pipeline full. So those are the 8 hard truths. And now let's get to another lazy regurgitation of LinkedIn content. So this was a greatest hit from our LinkedIn feed, or my LinkedIn feed, from about May 2024, I want to say. And here it goes. Agency owners, ever feel like there's something you used to do that worked, but you stopped doing it? A few that I'm guilty of. I used to conduct one-on-one follow-ups to prospects every Tuesday morning, but I stopped and had to make myself restart that again. We used to talk about team wins on our weekly standing meetings, but over time, we let the beginning of these calls trail off into immediate problem solving, which really kind of like killed the vibe, hurt morale, etc. I built a high converting presentation, but after 6 months and dozens of sales calls, I gradually watered it down for reasons that I'll get into. So why does this happen? So sometimes there's a short-term condition that makes us ditch the thing that worked temporarily. Maybe you built a finely tuned team structure, but then you lost a key employee and played musical chairs for far too long. Other times we swerve based on just 1 or 2 data points. Maybe a couple of prospects in a row gave you the same weird objection, so you changed up your presentation, and then the next 20 that you talked to couldn't care less and might have converted more easily from the thing that used to work. But there's a more common and I think much more human reason that we stop doing the things that work. And that's that we get bored and we forget. And we probably self-sabotage a bit too. So there's an interview with the drummer of the Smashing Pumpkins, one of my favorite bands. His name is Jimmy Chamberlin. He's just like this drum phenom. He really kind of held the band together like glue. And what he describes in this interview is like after playing the same hit songs like over and over again, thousands of times in a row, he sort of intentionally or subconsciously started changing his parts out of boredom, which messed up performances and pissed off the rest of the band, etc. So if you're leading an agency, you might be acting like Jimmy Chamberlin more than you should, and the rest of the band is your team. And by the way, this isn't taking anything away from Jimmy. I think he's one of the best rock drummers of all time. So many encourage us rightly to journal and do quarterly reviews. And there's a lot that's been said about this. It's tried and true about this sort of process or exercise. These exercises sometimes can expose us to new ideas and opportunities, but the thing that's underappreciated is that if you're doing these things right, they're mostly there to build a protective fence around the stuff that works by having this sort of barrier that's made from more time and more perspective. It's kind of like, to use another pop culture metaphor, I hope you don't mind, it's a little bit like doing the business equivalent of tattooing yourself with reminders. Like if you saw that movie Memento, where he's like, I'm looking for my wife's killer, and he has to look at his arm over and over again. So hopefully this has been helpful. And my question for you, if you're thinking about this, is what is the stuff that has worked for you in the past in a business context that you have stopped doing? Here is another greatest hit from the past year, this time from, I want to say August, I think, 2024. So agency owners are usually going after one of 3 things at any given time. Number 1, growth, which involves expanding revenues, headcount, locations, tackling new verticals, etc. Number 2, security, diversifying beyond that big, scary gorilla client, working with better clients overall, building systems that support a nice life that lets you go home on time without tons of stress, having a well-oiled machine. Number 3, transition, selling the agency, retiring, rebranding, optimizing the deliverable, the service, etc. So number 1 gets a lot more attention than the others, not because, in my experience or opinion, not because growth is necessarily a more noble goal, but because it generates openness and experimentation. If I talk to an agency owner in growth mode, it's more likely that they will embody the idea of what got us here won't get us there. So because there's more openness and experimentation means that there's a lot more to talk about. There's a lot more energy going into it. And that's why you see so much on LinkedIn about growth. It doesn't make it more noble though. Security and transition are just as, if not more important, because if you're not around long enough, you can't focus on growth to begin with. So this is a fun one, which ties directly to the problem we're looking to solve at Sales Schema. This is from June 2024, and here goes. So agency owners, ever get sick of companies telling you that they'll get you hundreds or thousands of leads? You know it's BS, but you rely on unpredictable referrals, so you might not know what your actual sales outreach KPIs should be. You might be tempted to read a bunch of articles or dig through historic CRM data to figure out what to aim for. And I'm here to tell you that that's all a waste of time. The numbers are actually very simple. When it comes to outreach, it boils down to this: one new prospect conversation per day. That's it. Since this sounds simple and catchy, you might be skeptical, but the data backs into this finding in a way that's almost eerie. So let's get into it. So why the daily convo KPI works. So assuming you're properly specialized, your market is finite, you can't bank on getting dozens of prospect conversations weekly just based on the size of things. That said, or continuing on rather, average outbound close rates are around 10%. We've seen this in our own numbers and other people's numbers. There's plenty of articles about this. It can obviously go more than that. It's an average, and it's something to work up to if you're new at this. Beyond that, if you have 5 conversations weekly and you get a 10% close rate, that means you could close a deal every 2 weeks, which is way more than enough for most agencies. That's actually like unsustainable for most agencies we work with, which don't scale that easily. So achieving these benchmarks will not be quick or easy. It's not to say you're just going to turn on a button and out comes 5 qualified meetings every week, but the numbers are indeed simple. So you don't have to tear your hair out over them. So with this conversation a day KPI, success becomes more about habits than massive complex projects. Here's another fun one. This is on the Allure and the siren song of intent data. This is from about 5 months ago, which would have been like, I think, September or so, 2024, if I have that right. So understandably, agency owners want to know who is actively buying the services that we sell. This need creates a huge opportunity for intent data and software companies to give us what we think we want. As Robert Rose argues, a buyer is not a person, it's a state that a person goes through. So while we obviously need to suss out who is ready to buy through our sales process, many owners make the mistake of building their entire biz dev strategy on talking to buyers at the expense of everyone else who's at an earlier stage. So there's a few problems with over-optimizing for buyers alone. Number one is the needle and haystack problem. Most successful agencies are specialized, or they're in the process of getting more specialized, which is where the world is going. So this means that the total addressable markets are small, and if the pie is sliced down to those who are only actively buying, you're left with a truly unsatisfying amount of pie, which is not good. So number two is de-risking conversations over pitching. When selling complex services to skeptical prospects, in our experience, the scarce resource is not awareness or differentiation, at least not at the top of the funnel. It's actually trust. The salesy copy that might convert an active buyer will typically annoy the vast majority of everybody else who are problem aware or curious, but not yet solution aware. So trying to optimize for just that small sliver of buyers is going to lead to things like deliverability issues when it comes to outreach, or just a huge waste of money if you're doing inbound marketing, or time if you're, blasting your list, and just basically stagnation. So from there, number 3 is the trust catch 22. So when it comes to big, expensive, career-impacting decisions like hiring an agency, which is not a small decision for most companies, executives rely on those they've known for months and years. We all know this. We all know that we get our best business and our most business from things like referrals and follow-on work in our network. So that's all great. So while you can use intent data to find the haystack needle, and maybe your buyer will ask you to throw your hat into the ring, when they're considering a number of agencies, most of the time they are going to hire the agency who built the relationship with them a while ago, i.e., weeks, months, or even years prior. So that creates that catch-22. So then what's the answer? It's basically building more of those relationships sooner and more often. So disclaimer, this is not a takedown of intent data or other tools that let you find buyers. Like, those can be valuable. You can throw them into the mix. There are things that you can do to combine people that might be further along with those that are likely to trust you. And you can get very advanced using tools like Clay and all the data sources that are out there. But in our experience, it's much more sustainable to build a system around relationship building in the right places, regardless of an immediate business opportunity. It takes more patience, but so does everything worthwhile, and it's a lot simpler than the alternatives. And for the last one, this one's a little bit more fun and ties into jiu-jitsu for better or possibly worse. There's a story about a world-class marathon runner who walked into Renzo Gracie Academy in NYC, where I train, and tried Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the first time. The runner can move like a gazelle through all 5 boroughs faster than a Peter Jackson movie, which is around 3 hours. But on the mats, he fatigued after a minute or two and was beaten easily, just like pretty much every other day one newbie. So this seems counterintuitive, right? Because you'd expect a world-class runner to have at least like some kind of edge, if not a big edge, in other sports. After all, cardio is a big factor in grappling and many other things, and he had that in spades. But when it comes to domain expertise, especially at the highest levels, skills are hard to transfer. And you see this in business all the time. Think of like the top-notch salesperson who can't persuade his team or her team to do anything. The skilled project manager who can run a dozen existing processes but can't really create a new one. The CEO who can listen thoughtfully. The CEO who can sit and listen thoughtfully to clients but can't stop yammering to prospects or his team. And vice versa for all of the above. So what I've sort of learned in business is that an important meta skill is realizing when you've fallen into a domain that's a lot different than what you're comfortable with, even if it feels 95% the same at first glance, even if it has the trappings of the thing that you know. So for example, in our world of B2B email outreach for agencies, where we're helping them build relationships with brand side executives, we have hired lots of copywriters over the years, more so before we pivoted to a training model, when we were doing this for people. And what we found is that very few, if any, copywriters can deal with the context switch that happens when you go from inbound style marketing copy to outbound, where there's much more nuance and subtlety, and you can't be as salesy if you want to get meetings. So for example, like most inbound copywriters focus on getting conversations and selling stuff. They create big, loud pattern interrupts that inspire emotions like desire or fear. But with outbound, again, there's more subtlety. Pattern interrupts are important, but they happen with a whisper instead of a shout. The emotions we aim for are those of trust and tribe, not desire or fear, at least not a lot of it. So when we nail it, the response we see from prospects is almost always a version of, there was something different about your message. I usually don't reply to this kind of thing, but there was something else going on here, which makes sense because these are busy people and it's not like they're just jumping on sales calls every 5 minutes, right? So what then are the qualities that transfer between domains? And this is a really important question to ask about somebody you might be looking to hire. So among others, these qualities include the capacity to learn, as well as a natural sense of curiosity, which unfortunately are very difficult to train for. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed this lazy LinkedIn regurgitation and look forward to catching you next week. Thanks so much.